All right. Welcome to the first episode of Prespective's Playbook. I will be going through my design process and design thinking behind real-world problems. And first up is job application forms and how frustrating they can be. Join me as I go through my process from the problem all the way through to the solution as a UX designer.
Have you ever started a job application online only to give up halfway through because it was just too frustrating? You're not alone. In fact, poor UX in a job application form is one of the biggest reasons companies lose great candidates before they even hit submit. So here's a clip of what I went through in a recent job application. As you can see, not only were there 4 pages of application form, but also a lot of field validation, there's nothing wrong with field validation, but it needs to be done right. But the most frustrating experience was the fact that they required a signature right at the end, and as you can see, I was not able to submit because I could not put my signature into the box. So what I actually faced was a problem. The problem was that the submission failed right at the last step, having gone through all the effort of filling out a 4-page application form. So spending 20 plus minutes doing that and then failing at the last step, it was just very, very frustrating. So my pain points were the fact that it was time consuming. The validation was overbearing, so I'm not sure how much that was actually vetted, and it just felt unnecessary at times. So the form itself was not auto-saving, so I had to stick with the progress and not go away from the form or come back and fill it in at a later time. So there was not an option to save my progress. So the form itself and the experience wasn't exactly mobile friendly either. So tapping here and not being able to enable the field, I'm not sure if the developers had considered that there'll be quite a fair few mobile users coming through. Repetitive questions, so you can get forms where you can use the likes of LinkedIn or autofill from a CV, and it feels like sometimes these questions may not have been vetted correctly, and I felt as though there was no real transparency or communication in terms of how this process would start and finish and expectation setting. From a business's perspective, they also have some frustrations and pain points. Hiring efficiency, so based on this experience, what they're going to get is a costly hiring process because so many candidates are not going to make it through. So the company reputation and brand gets impacted too because of this negative experience. There are websites like Glassdoor where people are able to leave reviews of how they've gone through the application process, and if something's bad like this and they can't actually apply, reputation is on the line. And because of this drop-off rate, candidates are likely to go elsewhere and the company are losing out on quality talent. And a different consideration here, but diversity and inclusion, where if you've got a poor accessibility experience, like the way that the fields were behaving with this particular website, you're actually limiting the hiring potential and the diversity of candidates. So with this in mind, I'm now going to go through my approach as a UX designer as to how I would fix this. With every UX design problem, there needs to be a balance of business needs and user needs, hence going through both sets of pain points. A great user experience isn't just about making things look good or easy to use, it's about creating products that serve both the user's needs and business goals. When a company emphasizes revenue, conversions, or operational efficiency at the expense of usability, then the user suffers, and vice versa. If there's an overemphasis on user comfort without considering KPIs, scalability, or business impact, product may not be sustainable, and in the future the business may not have enough budget or appetite to concentrate on user experience and the design. So the first step in improving this user experience would be to actually engage the users. So in this case, I'm talking about the recruiters. So it's not the end user, but the people that are trying to obtain the information from the end user, because ultimately they're the ones that are shaping the form. They know what information they require to actually make a hiring decision. So I would audit the existing application form and understand and sit down the information that is essential. With that and knowing what fields are required, it's a case of understanding which ones are mandatory as well. So working out what are necessary, unnecessary, and then the information that they cannot do their job without. And then work on those rules and validation fields to improve the error messages and potentially reduce the amount that are required as well. I then would structure the form into meaningful sections, so grouping the related questions together, categorizing them, and applying a step-based flow. Once the structure of the form and the questions have been established, it would be essential to run usability tests with existing users. So that could be a variety of job seekers, and then conduct session recordings to see how they are faring with the form. And this is an opportunity to then measure drop-off rates to see where they're actually struggling. That would then lead into improving the design of the form, if necessary, based on that evidence. So potentially then doing A/B testing with different layouts, and then keep monitoring in terms of how successful the form is once it goes live. So here are the as-is and to-be journeys. The reason I map these out is because I need to improve what the flow is, and I believed from the get-go that this particular form, as is, was just too long. So as I mentioned, there were 4 different steps. So at the moment, the user jumps onto the website, they're greeted with a landing page, and then has to go through 4 separate pages of fields to then eventually submit on the last one where there is a signature required. And that's where my drop-off happened. And I eventually got to the submission point at the end, but it took several attempts to get there. Now, if I were to improve this journey, there are several mechanisms to be able to just condense everything into one. And so my to-be journey would be start off, I'm going to apply to this job, there'll be a landing page, but then one application page where there would be separate sections and the user can fill out those sections accordingly and then submit, and that's it. So condensing it down from several steps into just 3 effectively. So a big part of my role as a UX designer is considering the information architecture of a website. Information architecture covers several aspects, including site navigation, the hierarchy of information, and how data is going to be structured. So my initial questions with this would be, what are the fields that are required? And of those fields which are mandatory, what format does each field need to be? And can any of them be pre-populated or auto-filled? You can see this table here where I then have structured each field item into sections, so personal information, job specific information, work experience, education, etc., etc. And then each column next to it then is representing the field, whether it's required, the type of field it might be, so it could be email, it could be a text input, it could be a drop down, a variety of things. And then associated with that is the best practice, so understanding how each of those fields will behave and what it should do. This impacts or influences the actual validation and errors as well. So which fields require validation, what are the rules for that field, and what is the messaging or content that is required. And that forms part of the considerations as well in terms of the content. So for me, the content needs to inform, the content needs to instruct, and the content needs to clarify. Those are essential. So those are the things that I'm thinking about when structuring the information. So as designers, there's best practice as to how we do validation on fields. Now I've summarized it here, starting with validating after user has input. So don't start validating the field when somebody is typing into the box. Ensure that what they've entered actually meets the requirements after the fact. So providing specific error messages, this goes back to communication and the content. It needs to have that clarity, it needs to instruct, and it needs to help the user. Providing inline validation, that's a given. So here you can see that the messaging is right next to the field that it's associated with. Offering alternative input methods. So this is my example where the signature box was entering into the signature box but wasn't allowing me to do that, so there could be an alternative in the sense of maybe uploading something or just a different way of designing it. Next one is about keeping the information, so persistence of information. So say the user has submitted and they then have to correct something, ensure that that data retains in those fields so they don't have to refill those fields in again. Optimizing for mobile users, so these days devices are in the hands of pretty much everybody. They're not often on their laptop, so ensuring that the fields and the validation are mobile friendly. For example, switching the keyboard to a numeric keyboard if they need to enter their phone number, as an example. Auto-saving progress is essential, so you're going through a form and say if it's several pages like I had to go through, give them the option to either save automatically or manually save and come back to the form if they need to. Accessibility is king, so if the forms are being designed, they need to be designed with everybody in mind. If you design for the few, you can impact the many. Think about things like screen readers, the messaging that goes behind that, and how the form is structured so that the screen readers and other tools can handle it. Using colors, icons, and text in a combination of those things that helps in the sense of a checkbox for something that's successful or a cross that something's failed. And the color red, for example, is a failure as well. There's this human association in terms of red means like a warning and green means something is good or positive. And then finally, preventing the form to be submitted until all of the mandatory fields or errors have been fixed. So this is essential for both sides in the sense of the business and the user. So from the business, they're not getting forms that have been submitted incorrectly, and then from the user's perspective, they know exactly what they need to fix and then know that they can submit thereafter. For me, prototyping is one of the exciting parts of being a UX designer. This is where I can get really creative in terms of how something is going to go from information or just data items into something that's more structured, visible, and eventually in the hands of users. So I start my process by just making notes and thinking about how I can take that information or research that I've done about the users and information and even the business requirements to then start thinking about components and how that information could be structured in a better way, having known that I've gone through these pain points already, or that the users have gone through certain pain points, and immediately thinking about best practices or alternative ways of displaying that information. So here I've got a couple of considerations in the sense of the components to display information, so there has to be efficiency with those components, and then ease of use as well. And a couple of examples could be accordions and progress bars to keep expectations and progress aware for the user as to how far they've gone into the process, and then completing the entire application without fear that something has got lost or they've missed something. And now I'm actually going to go into the design that I eventually created as a result of this whole design thinking process. So here we go. This is the redesigned job application for the particular role that I applied for. I've created a landing page that tells you the role that I am applying for. Welcome to Better Job Applications, i.e. the company, and then why you might want to join the team, or why I might want to join the team. And then instructions on how to actually apply, so setting the expectations. So they could apply immediately through this call to action straight away, but otherwise they can go through the details of the role in case they haven't come through, say, something like a direct link from LinkedIn where they may have already seen the description. So they have the opportunity to again re-clarify what the role is, what the job description is, the type of work that they'll be doing, and what the company is actually looking for. And again, a repeating of the call to action. Now here, when that call to action is clicked, they've got the instructions to say you can apply for this role in 3 easy ways: either manually fill in the form, or autofill it with the CV, or as a final option, autofilling through their LinkedIn account. And as you can see, it's also saying that the progress will autosave as the user progresses through the form. And if they want to retrieve that data next time, they can just simply log back in to pick up where they left off. So use my CV, use my links as clear calls to actions, but then the actual application form. So you can see the design thinking from previously has been applied here, where each of the key sections have been put into an accordion. So the user can choose as to the order they want to fill the form in and go through each section. And then finally, there is a signature submission section, and you can see as they progress through the form, it ticks off to give them the expectation and understanding of their progress. But the final section here, and what I was frustrated with in terms of my application, was the signature. So here, all I've done is said, put in your full name, which is a best practice. But then also you can see I've not put in my full name, so the validation and error messages come up to say, enter your full name to submit your application. Once they've filled in every section and put in their full name for the signature, what happens is a confirmation message, so ending the process to say, hey, hurrah, you've applied, and you'll hear back from us soon. So setting that expectation again as to what's actually happening in the process, being friendly, saying they're going to review the form and what actually happens next in terms of application review, the next steps in terms of hearing back in a certain time frame. And in the meantime, if they want to stay connected, they can either contact via an email address or go to LinkedIn to see more about the company. And one final thing is something that I thought about in terms of alternatives to the signature design. So what I adopted initially was the full name as the submission requirement. So the other alternatives could be using a checkbox to say I have declared that the information is true and I am signing this off. And then another alternative would be to use your finger to sign in the box, and that's your signature. And as a final option would be uploading your signature as an image from your device. So thank you for joining me on this journey. This covers the process that I would take on improving job application forms or forms in general. Hopefully you found it insightful and useful and gives you food for thought on how you may approach your next form design. Watch this space for the next episode of Prespective's Playbook. I would love to hear your comments and thoughts and feedback. Maybe you've got something specific that you want covering. I'd be happy to take that on as a challenge and go through it next time. In the meantime, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow me on LinkedIn. Ciao for now.